The MLB trade deadline is looming, and you can almost feel the tension humming through Citi Field like a neon sign flickering before a blackout. Mets fans have been here before. The hope, the fear, the endless debates on talk radio and group chats. Everyone's got their version of the ideal blockbuster, but the shadow of past blunders still hangs over Flushing. If you're the Mets' front office, you're not just playing chess. You're playing speed chess in a hurricane, and the last thing you want to do is repeat the same mistakes that left fans shaking their heads and shouting at the TV last July. Last year's deadline left scars. This year, one wrong move and the Mets could set their rebuild back years. Just look back at last year's move. Paul Gervais, a name most Mets fans barely had time to Google, was swapped to the Rays for Tyler Zuber, a reliever whose Mets career was so brief you'd need a microscope and a search warrant to find it on Baseball Reference. Gervais? He's now throwing pitches in Tampa's bullpen, living out the big league dream, while Zuber barely unpacked his bags before heading out the door with a lonely DFA slip. If you needed a lesson in why trading promising prospects for fringe relievers is a bad idea, there it is, gift-wrapped and tied with a Mets blue bow. This is the trade deadline tightrope. Make the wrong move, and you're not just risking a wasted roster spot, you're sacrificing years of development for a guy who might only stick around long enough to blow a late lead in a Wednesday matinee. That kind of mistake is more than a line on a spreadsheet. It's a gut punch to a fan base that's endured more than enough heartbreak already. So what do the Mets need to avoid at all costs? Let's break it down. First, don't even think about adding another Tyler Zuber-type arm if it means shipping out a prospect who could actually matter a year or two from now. That should be MLB trade deadline rule number 1, etched in granite. Everyone in baseball loves the idea of the sneaky pickup, the under-the-radar move that turns into gold. But for every Edwin Diaz trade, when it works out, there's 100 what-were-they-thinking transactions that haunt teams for years. Look, the idea of bringing in Zuber last year sounded decent on paper. He'd been showing flashes in the minors, and relievers do have that weird tendency to randomly catch fire for a month or two. But Gervais wasn't just a lottery ticket. He was a real asset knocking on the door of the majors, and the Rays, who are basically baseball's equivalent of a Silicon Valley startup with a pitching lab in the basement, don't just take guys for no reason. Now Zuber's Mets career is a trivia answer, and Gervais is eating innings in the big leagues. That's the kind of hindsight that stings. It's the difference between making a move and making the right move. And it's not just about names on a transaction report. Every time Mets flip a prospect like that for a short-term fix, it's a signal, a sign that the process has slipped in favor of panic. That's not how championship teams are built. And if you want any chance at sustainable October baseball, you have to avoid those knee-jerk deals like they're radioactive. The second trap to sidestep? Believing that the offense is good enough as is. You hear that phrase every year from GMs, and it's almost always wishful thinking. Sure, David Stearns went on record saying center field is the one spot he'd think about upgrading, but if you watched the Mets bats sputter through the dog days, you know there are more cracks in this lineup than just a single outfield hole. Third base? It's been a carousel. DH? More like a revolving door for guys who were hot for about 10 minutes in May. Even second base feels unsettled, with players shuffling in and out like it's an open mic night. Starling Marte is back from the IL, and yeah, that's a boost, but it doesn't erase the fundamental issue. There just isn't enough firepower. The lefty DH spot is a mirage. Ronnie Mauricio looks more like trade bait than the next big thing, and the young bats have been cold enough to give you frostbite in August. And let's be real. No one's expecting the Mets to swing for Shohei Ohtani here, but rolling into the second half of the season without at least a reliable bat off the bench? That's begging for trouble. You can't count on a bunch of rookies to suddenly find their stroke against playoff caliber pitching. And you can't win in October if your DH is putting up a .720 OPS and you're hoping for a hot streak that never comes. This is the time for a smart addition, not just a warm body. Now, the third and perhaps most controversial mistake to avoid: don't be afraid to let go of a prospect you really like if the deal is right. This is where the rubber meets the road for any Pobo, and it's what separates the winners from the also-rans. The question isn't whether the Mets are a championship roster on paper. They probably aren't if we're being brutally honest. But in baseball, all you need is a ticket to the dance and a team that gets hot at the right time. Injuries, streaks, luck, October is chaos, and the team that sneaks in often goes further than anyone expects. Last year, the Mets hedged. They dabbled at the deadline, made a few one-for-one swaps, but never really pushed the chips in. That was fine for a team on the fringe. This year, the math is different. The division is tighter, the margins are thinner, and the window is as open as it's ever going to be. Sometimes that means making a bold move. Sometimes it means sending out a prospect you've fallen in love with for the kind of arm that can lock down the 8th inning in a must-win game. Of course, you have to be smart. Don't trade a future all-star shortstop for a rental reliever who's trending the wrong way. But if the right deal is there, if the Guardians dangle Emmanuel Clase, for example, and the price is a prospect who's blocked anyway, you have to at least pick up the phone. Clase is under team control through 2028 and has the stuff to make hitters look foolish, even if he'd be setting up for Edwin Diaz instead of closing games. Sometimes you make the bold move because that's what separates the teams who are still playing in October from the ones holding press conferences about building for the future. And yes, the Mets' bullpen needs help. The stats are fine, middle of the pack, but everyone knows that playoff baseball isn't played on paper. One blown save in September can turn a hot streak into a tailspin. The Phillies, Dodgers, even the Guardians themselves, everyone's sniffing around for relief help, and the market is thin. If you're David Stearns, you can't afford to let a difference maker slip through your fingers just because of prospect hoarding. Now the calendar's flipping, the rumors are flying, and the Mets are on the verge of their first sweep since the start of summer. Fans are buzzing after Francisco Alvarez's clutch homer and Nemo's timely RBI. There's a bit of hope swirling again. Menanea's back on the mound, Burke's trying to play spoiler, and the Mets are actually stringing wins together at a critical juncture. But let's not kid ourselves. It's these next few days that will shape the rest of the year, and maybe the next several after that. If the front office gets jittery, makes a panic trade, or stands pat while the lineup withers, the fallout will be impossible to ignore. On the other hand, the right mix of boldness and discipline could finally give this city what it's been starving for: a team built to last, not just another cautionary tale. So what's your take? Are you in favor of a big splash, or do you want to see the Mets keep their prospects safe and build for the long haul? Should the front office double down on offense, or do you trust the current group to deliver when it matters? Let us know what you think in the comments below. And don't forget, like, subscribe, and keep an eye out because the drama at the trade deadline is just heating up.